I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is Elizabeth Nickson's hate speech. Ethics is consistency and no proper nouns. All of the text to this will be at thirdparadigm.substack.com, along with links and really beautiful AI art from Amy Rosebush. Check it out. I'll be looking at different episodes from Elizabeth, but the one that instigated it is called Campus Protesters Are Straight Up Nazis, subtitled From the River to the Sea is Genocidal, and she is not talking about Israel. This is her opening meme. A kafaya on an American college campus is just a hipster swastika. Elizabeth Nickson writes the Substack Welcome to Absurdistan with over 16,000 subscribers. She's the author of The Monkey Puzzle Tree, which I've read, and Eco-Fascist, How Radical Conservationists Are Destroying Our National Heritage. Her literary pedigree includes Time magazine, European bureau chief of Life, The Telegraph, The Globe and Mail, British Vogue, Harper's, The Independent, The Guardian, The Observer. Her literal pedigree goes back to the Puritan founders of the U.S. and Canada, and she is a bona fide daughter of the American Revolution. Her blended family today includes Venezuelan, Jamaican, and Jew, as she wants us to know. Gavin Moonsey, who my readers might know, has criticized her justifications for clear-cut logging of the last remaining ancient forest in British Columbia, Canada. I'll be presenting some of his research here, but the full text will be linked. In this episode, I'll be looking at Elizabeth's logic and ethical consistency, a phrase that is redundant, because ethics is consistency. I define hate speech as superiority, insulting other people rather than looking for the cause in stories and systems that pit people against one another. My focus is on the systems and the stories. By happenstance, I was listening to the Front Porch playlist on Spotify while making a chocolate cake, and a song came on by Molly Tuttle called Crooked Tree. The lyrics go, "Crooked tree won't fit into the mill machine. They're left to grow wild and free. I'd rather be a crooked tree." Logging isn't the problem. Gavin grew up in British Columbia, to which Elizabeth has returned. Her ancestors came to Vancouver when it was 4,000 people and developed it. His grandfather was a forester in Vancouver and helped create or protect the Lost Lake Park in Whistler, the Chicamus Canyon Old Growth Trail, and park trails all through the Sea to Sky corridor. He grew up with loggers and knows that it can be done in a way to create jobs, nurture human communities, and protect biodiversity and ancient forest. Gavin's most recent fan is James Corbett, so he's clearly not falling for the climate change psyop that Elizabeth rightly debunks in The Epic Bullshit of Catastrophic Climate Change. Elizabeth starts her article with a solicitation from the RFK campaign, to which she responds that she'll donate as soon as he fixes the problem he caused in the province where she lives. She explains the problem. 1. In British Columbia, we had the largest industrial forest in the world. 2. It paid for education and universal free health care. 3. The environmental left decided to shut it down. 4. The reason for their protest was that the government, as was common practice, had sold cutting permits with long leaseholds. A new socialist government announced it was pulling the permits and taking those forests back. 5. In order to not lose all the invested money, which they had not only paid for upfront and in annual leasing charges, but paid taxes on, some for decades, lessees immediately clear-cut their lands. Clear cuts are ugly, she continues, but they are fire breaks. 6. That triggered the protest. Pulp fiction. Gavin provides some excellent information on why cutting down ancient forests is not something that prevents fire and does not provide a fire break, and that will be linked. But he also, in his comment, gave some background to that industrial forest in point number 1, which seems to me like a factory in the wild. He writes, since 2000, Canada has lost more than 19.6 million hectares of primary forest, the third highest rate of intact forest loss in the world after Brazil and Russia. BC saw by far the biggest decline in tree cover of any province, losing more than 8.5 million hectares. Much of that loss has been due to the pulp and paper industry. Roughly 40% of the trees cut in the province every year end up in a pulp mill, according to data collected by Canopy, a Vancouver-based organization that works with over 900 major brands to create so-called sustainable forestry supply chains. The pace of loss comes as decisions over Canada's forests are increasingly being concentrated into the hands of one private company, Paper Excellence. Recently, the company acquired Resolute Forest Products, making it the largest forestry company in North America. Paper Excellence now controls 22 million hectares of Canadian forest and has ownership over 37 pulp and paper mills across Canada, the U.S., France, and Brazil. Paper Excellence has said between 10 and 14% of the wood feeding its mills comes from old-growth trees. The people behind and or associated with Paper Excellence have a pattern of using thickets of corporations, including tax havens, effectively shielding transactions and assets from public and government scrutiny. Freedom of Information requests revealed the origins of some of the company's past financing, some of which was facilitated by the China Development Bank, which is owned by the Chinese government. Leaked records and insider accounts also show that Paper Excellence appears to have been closely and secretly coordinating business and strategy decisions with Asia Pulp and Paper, one of the world's biggest pulp and paper players, which has a track record of environmental destruction. Poor lessees, paying those taxes for decades, only to have the rug pulled out from under them. What else could they do but clear-cut the last remaining ancient rainforest stands in the world and pulp them into digits in a bank account? Pirates of the trees. Gavin addresses point number 2 on industrial forests paying for education and free universal health care. He asks, what kind of education system? One that suffocates our children with medical-looking face masks, conditions them to be afraid, offers them gender reassignment, and coerces them to receive experimental mRNA injections so that Pfizer can profit. And do not even get me started on the healthcare system. For more info on the wonders of our modern allopathic medical system, he links Exploring the True Nature of Big Pharma. Gavin also refers to the indigenous population who managed their own education and healthcare until the benevolent colonists came along. My daughters are still haunted by a documentary I had them watch about those nightmare trauma-inducing schools. In his recent article, Why I Do Not Celebrate Canada Day, Gavin writes, "Think the residential schools are some kind of isolated incident? I have friends with heritage rooted in several different First Nation cultures. Some are old enough where they remember when the government agents and RCMP came for them and their siblings to kidnap them and drag them off to the residential schools. Some eluded their would-be captors and had to live a life on the run as young adults. Some were not so lucky and the stories they tell me about the atrocities that were perpetrated upon innocent children there in government-sponsored facilities run by priests and nuns are so disturbing that hearing them would bring tears to your eyes and make you sick to your stomach. Torture and mass murder of innocent children took place in those facilities all over Canada. These facilities were engaging in the forced sterilization of Indigenous girls up to the year 2000 in some provinces. As a reader of Gavin's, Pirate Studebaker responded to me, "Elizabeth is a mid-level elitist. She actually believes her ancestors did the Indigenous people a favor by stealing their land and destroying their lives and culture. Now that the descendants of the people her ancestors destroyed have many social problems like poverty, she blames them and even says they are ingrates. I am a citizen of Native Nation and I know what I'm talking about." The left shut it down. So it is not the fault of those poor capitalists for destroying our national heritage. What else could they do but that perfectly reasonable asset grab? It's the damned Greens who interfered, forcing the revenuers to grab and go. Elizabeth writes, "I've spent enough time on the cultural left, the hard left, and the communist left, up and down the status scale, to know this is what they think of humanity. They hate us, and a lot. This is a bog common human trait, which Christianity, when it was the flower of the culture, made sure to battle every Sunday in church. Even if it hurts, you are supposed to love your neighbor. It is still true in the real, not left world. Christianity, the flower of the culture. Love preached from every pulpit every Sunday. Oh my! I had to look up bog common and found it associated with marshes of ill repute and latrines, as in the denigrating term bog Irish. So the common folk of humanity is a swamp of hatred, from which the flower of loving Christian right has bloomed. Elizabeth ends with this love bomb. They will destroy Western civilization in order to prosecute this lie, and they will do it without guilt while reveling in hate and luxury. If not stopped, Greens will become the most brutal oppressors and genocidal maniacs in human history." If that's what she calls love, I wonder what she calls hate. Oh yeah, people who give up their comfort and freedom to prevent 1,000-year-old trees from being felled for pulp. Stupidity is abuse. Elizabeth's response to Gavin demonstrates her club membership. Like thousands in British Columbia, Gavin, I own 20,000 trees, and more than 24 old growth. BC is 6% developed, and the forests were managed well. Gavin replies, "Saying BC is 6% developed is an intentionally vague statement that says nothing about how much of the original, intact, unlogged forest still remains. Since there is only 2% of the original old growth, primary ancient temperate rainforest left in BC, which is the only section left in the world that has not been clear-cut, you can understand that we have been chopping down very old trees and replanting monocultures of young ones for quite some time now. This means that there are plenty of replanted timber forest on Vancouver Island to be logged that are not sensitive ancient rare ecosystems, with the last original trees living in them. The difference is that logging corporations and government entities make about 4 times as much money chopping down the ancient trees, as opposed to the replanted ones. When a logger takes a job to cut down primary old growth, they often have to be willing to drive past the hundreds of indigenous people and other forest protectors attempting to block the roads and into the exclusion zone, which is the area being guarded by militarized RCMP with submachine guns, tasers, mace, and zap straps, to chop down the very last 1,000-year-old trees in existence on the island. They know exactly what they are doing. Elizabeth ended with another Christian expression of love. You are an idiot and undereducated and blocked. This is an abuse-free zone, and stupidity is abuse. Gavin isn't the only recipient of this love until it hurts. Francis Leader writes, "Unfortunately, I tangled with Elizabeth Nickson myself recently, and she did not come over as particularly agreeable to my challenge. You may find that she dishes out a mean brand of bitchcraft. She said that it was obvious I had not had any training, and my writing is infantile. She said that I needed an editor. I wrote back that I have no desire to write like a mainstream stenographer for the CIA, and she blocked me. And if you have not read Francis Leader, you owe it to yourself. It's quite a treat." Obama's paragliders. I was intrigued by Elizabeth's stance for local sovereignty, which is the purpose of my economic system in How to Dismantle an Empire. We had some friendly exchanges regarding her book on MKUltra mind control, which I read. But it was this article where I unsubbed her. Obama Inc. is running out of brown people to kill. As the culprit for October 7th, Elizabeth blames not Hamas, not Israel, but Obama. October 7th, she writes, was designed, gamed, and triggered. It was meant to hide their disastrous government. Trump rises in the polls with every regime attack. Parents have never been so activated. This is Obama's game. His people did it. This is how arrogant he is. He needs war to win the next election. He needs war to escape the devastation of his reputation, to save his legacy. And he hates Israel. So he's launched a color revolution to take down Bibi and break Israel's legerdemain in science, business, and near everything else. Swamp the country with guilt and brutalize its people. Obama is a criminal. Biden is a criminal. The Bushes made their money on Jewish slaves at Auschwitz and financing the Nazis. Once you have done that, there is no goodness in you. It's all lies and corruption, and you can't even see the good. You serve Lucifer. So she sees the purpose of October 7th as inflicting mass trauma on all of us. Writing, "The past decades have seen one collective trauma after another, beginning with the JFK assassination, all used as psychological warfare, launched on innocent citizens, meant to reduce us to dependence on a malignant government. October 8th's beheaded babies, old lady hostages, videotaped rapes, children in cages were meant for every single one of us." So I think it's interesting that she starts with JFK's assassination, since I've been reading Laurent Guillenot on the connections of Israel to that. She also says that she was raised with a reverence for Jewish people because my father had been put in charge of a concentration camp. A work camp, not a death camp, he would say, after the war. When he would say, "I saw things," and trail off, Elizabeth inserts a photo of a pit filled with naked, emaciated dead bodies to show us what he probably saw. So, if Elizabeth's father was in charge of a concentration camp after the war, who was in it? Certainly not Jews. U.S. soldiers liberated the Jews, right? Why would they be there after the war? Elizabeth's father could never have been in charge of a German concentration camp during the war. As those who've done the research know, those would be Germans who filled the camp and whose naked, emaciated bodies would have been in those pits. I commented in her thread, "Tell me more about your dad. My dad fought in World War II, but he would have been over 100 now. I don't think your dad was lying when he called them work camps. Something happened that isn't what we've been told. I don't know what that was, but I know we haven't been told the truth. Speaking of which, there were no beheaded babies." This one of mine quotes Max Blumenthal debunking that, and I refer one of my episodes. And on the old ladies as hostages, my recent one has a link to the released hostage who talked about how nice they were to them. The footage of kids in cages were Palestinians from 3 years ago. It's Israeli soldiers who are laughing at them. Vanessa Beeley has a lot of evidence on this. Last, Obama is a puppet of Israel. Operation Cast Lead, the 22-day assault killing 1,400 Palestinians, happened just before he took office. He said he couldn't intervene because he wasn't president yet, but that didn't stop him from bailing out the bankers. So Obama golfed while Gaza burned, and it ended on the day of his inauguration. Does that seem coincidental to you? Elizabeth didn't reply. Guantanamo goes to college. Elizabeth, however, has outdone herself in campus protesters are straight-up Nazis. She writes, "I am frankly on the side of the Jewish people, but enough is enough. What is happening is anathema, tragic, and very, very wrong. Those stupid, stupid kids protesting, why on earth do we let them trash the campuses and cleave to evil? From the river to the sea is genocidal. We allow hundreds of thousands of hate-filled marchers on our streets who believe the same thing about Jews as Hitler. How is that in any way acceptable? Trust me, most of us, upwards of 90%, think the way I do. Only 5% of us are actually anti-Semites. It is our leadership, riven with cowardice and appeasement, that lets it continue. Where would we be without the Jewish people? I'll tell you, a lot poorer and vastly less evolved. Pound for pound, they have contributed more to humanity than the rest of us put together. The Persians, or whatever they call themselves, vastly less than any other race. What they have brought in my lifetime is murder, death, horror, and fear of financial collapse. They farm our horror for cash." So, where to begin? Elizabeth declares her allegiance and then reconfigures the facts to it. Those protesting genocide are genocidal. To go against genocide is to be a Nazi. To march against genocide is to be hate-filled and cleave to evil. When a journalist says, "Trust me," they've abdicated that role. Either you think like Elizabeth or you're anti-Semite. Those are the two options. For a moment, I thought she meant our leadership wasn't sending enough military aid to Israel. But her link condemns academic leadership for not brutalizing their anti-genocide students. Elizabeth would be proud of the UC Santa Cruz chancellor, who brought in 300 riot police from all over California campuses and cities. They started an assault at midnight that lasted for 9 hours. Maybe Elizabeth vicariously bestowed some of that Christian baton-wielding love, sending a number of them to the emergency room. An article writes, "Protesters sustained battered ribs, concussions, and other head injuries, nerve damage, sprained wrist, and other extremities. severe bruising and wounds related to zip tie use, including lacerations requiring stitching. Students who were present on the scene as emergency medical technicians and first aid responders furnished trained medical care to injured protesters. At times, however, they were impeded from doing so because of the incessant police assaults on captive protesters. All frontline student medics were arrested. Another community member was beaten with a bag over their head until they passed out. Videos show them struggling to hold their body upright as they were put into a police vehicle. Witnesses said the bag also led to their suffocation and that the individual vomited as a result. Witnesses shouted for the bag to be removed. This protester later reported having been concussed and needing to seek treatment in the emergency room as a result of being assaulted by the police. Hanging the moon on evil. It's the Muslim for whom Elizabeth reserves her choice hate, while reversing it naturally. She writes, "What they contribute is their hate for us and our culture, one of the pillars of which is the Hebrew faith, as demonstrated all spring on the streets of every city. And they want to outbreed us, and turn women into slaves, and terrorize the rest of us. In the towns they have taken over, they slaughter animals in their backyards and toss the carcass into the trash or the ditch behind their house. And the endless wailing from their loudspeakers in ancient English villages like Chelmsford. An act of civil disorder and contempt for the host culture. The intelligent among them do nothing to stop the hate and madness they hide. There is no equivalence, zero, between Muslim and Jewish culture." So she writes about how Jews beat everyone in IQ tests, and that means a lot to Elizabeth. She's dated Jews for years. I assume when she says we'd be a lot poorer without the Jews, she's speaking from experience, because that's not my experience, or statistically true, since every concentration of wealth has to be taken away from a distributed population. She continues, "Of course Jews are overrepresented at the top of every profession. And yes, evil Jews can be spectacularly evil. But it isn't a cabal. It's just that if you are smarter than everyone, you can hang the moon when it comes to evil." So I say Jews are not overrepresented at the top of professions that do useful labor, like farming, logging, construction, or plumbing. They are at the top of professions that make the most money from other people, with the least amount of physical labor. And could Elizabeth name those spectacularly evil Jews? She certainly didn't hear. And what behavior qualifies as evil so we can apply her definition uniformly? Hate sells. I started writing this article believing that Elizabeth was sincere in her dedication to helping communities, but mistaken in some of her ideas. I now think she was a liberal journalist taking on the establishment when it was fashionable and profitable, and now has gone back to her roots of being the establishment. Her campus protesters are Nazi stance is parroted from the appropriately named Dana Bash on CNN. Caitlin Johnstone points out that Dana's surname is from her first husband, who became chief of staff for the CIA and Pentagon. And CNN staff have leaked to The Guardian that they are pressured to report from a pro-Israel bias. Elizabeth's bias, which are as full of hate and ugly stereotypes as I have ever seen, seem to come naturally to her. She is a cheerleader for hate and calls it Christian love. Nothing sells like hate, especially when cloaked in superiority. What isn't an easy sell are solutions. Why did British Columbia sell not only its assets, but the right for someone else to take them in order to provide two services to themselves: education and health care. People in British Columbia were the teachers and the doctors. Why do you need exports to buy the labor of your own population? And why do far-flung investors own the labor of logging communities? They haven't lifted a finger except to issue orders to slash and raze while they can. A blurb on Elizabeth's bio page reads, Elizabeth Nickson Stories has all the makings of a Hollywood biopic. A Westmount exile who rebels against power and privilege becomes a globe-trotting leftist journalist, chronicling the great revolutionary narratives of her time. Then she sets out to discover the awful truth about her patriarchal 400-year-old colonist clan, and everything changes. But Hollywood won't touch her script, because what she finds are eternal truths about love, charity, sacrifice, Christianity, and genuine freedom. Let's title that biopic, why don't we? To see the forest, get rid of the trees. Or how about the money puzzle tree? How to profit from hate and destruction. The synopsis: just call hate love, call those who oppose genocide genocidal, and blame conservationists for destroying our national heritage. That should do it. For more on Gavin, I have linked in the Substack my essay on his book, Recipes for Reciprocity. And here are two on looking at solutions: I Mage a Nation, and This is Changing Our Story. Thank you for watching.